A lonely cowboy took in the tall orphan everyone ignored. Then she gave him back a family. The last child in the line did not cry, and that was what made Silas Boone stop walking. In Red Willow, Texas, folks called it Mercy Day, though there was not much mercy in it. Once a month, the county brought children to the churchyard and placed them before families who needed help on farms, in kitchens, at wash tubs, or with livestock. The little ones were taken first, because soft faces opened soft hearts. The sturdy boys went next, because a rancher could always use another pair of hands. By noon, the shade under the church roof was crowded with new promises, some kind and some not. But one girl still stood beside the steps. She was tall, too tall for the dress she wore, too tall for the soft picture people carried in their minds when they came looking for a child. Her sleeves stopped above her wrists, and the hem showed the dust on her ankles. Her brown hair was tied back with a strip of faded cloth. She held a small bundle against her stomach with both hands, as if that bundle was the last wall between her and the world. Silas had not meant to stay. He had come into Red Willow for coffee, nails, and feed for his horse. He had work waiting somewhere west of the Pecos, or so a ranch boss had said in a letter 3 weeks old. Silas knew better than to trust old letters. Work had a way of disappearing before a man reached it. He was 39, lean from the trail, quiet from years of having no one to talk to, and poor in the careful way of men who kept their grief folded tighter than their money. His hat was dusty. His coat was worn at the elbows. His horse, Buck, stood tied near the trough, shifting under flies. Still, Silas stopped. Not because the girl looked helpless. She did not. That was the trouble. She looked like she had already measured every face in that yard and found no place to rest her hope. A woman in a blue bonnet stepped close, looked the girl up and down, then turned away with a sad little shake of her head. A farmer asked her age, heard the answer, and moved on before the county clerk finished speaking. 2 boys near the fence whispered and laughed about her height until the girl's jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed dry. Silas knew that look. A person wore it when they had learned that showing pain only gave cruel people a place to point. The county clerk, Mr. Pritchard, closed his book with a tired slap. He was a narrow man with ink on his fingers and no patience left in his face. "Well," Pritchard said, looking around the thinning yard, "that leaves Miss Abigail Mercer." The girl lifted her chin. Silas heard himself ask, "How old is she?" Pritchard turned, surprised to find him still there. 14, near 15. The girl looked at Silas then, not pleading, not smiling, just looking. Her gray eyes were steady, sharp, and tired in a way no child's eyes had a right to be. "Can she ride?" Silas asked. "I can answer for myself," the girl said. A few people turned at that. Her voice was low, calm, and clear. Silas almost smiled but did not, then answer. "I can ride, I can cook, I can mend. I can milk a cow if the cow has manners. If it does not, I can still milk it, but I will not enjoy the conversation." One older man chuckled under his breath. Pritchard frowned as if humor was not allowed on Mercy Day. Silas studied her bundle. It was small enough to hold nothing but a change of cloth and maybe a Bible. "You have kin." "No living kin that wants to claim me," she said. There was no bitterness in it, and somehow that made it heavier. Pritchard cleared his throat. Her mother passed some years back. Father died on the wagon road north of San Angelo. County kept her 3 weeks. Fee is $2 to cover papers and placement. $2. Silas had $4 and some coins to his name. He needed feed, beans, coffee, and maybe a room if weather turned mean. $2 was not a small thing to a man who owned no roof. The girl kept looking at him. A hot wind moved through the church yard. It stirred the dust around her boots and lifted one loose strand of hair against her cheek. She did not brush it away. She stood still, as if movement itself might be counted against her. Silas thought of another child, not one he had held, not one who had lived long enough to have a name spoken over a cradle. Just a child buried with his mother in a cholera year, beneath a wooden marker that time and rain had likely softened by now. That child would have been about this girl's age. He hated the thought as soon as it came. Grief was a door he kept nailed shut. But the girl at the church steps stood at the end of a line with no one stepping forward, and something inside Silas moved before his good sense could catch it. He reached into his pocket and placed 2 worn silver dollars into Pritchard's palm. The clerk blinked. "You are taking responsibility for her." Silas looked at Abigail Mercer. Her face had not changed, but her fingers pressed harder into the bundle. "For now," Silas said, "until I can make it proper." Pritchard opened the ledger again. "Name: Silas Boone." The pen scratched across the page. Abigail watched the ink move as if it were drawing a road she had not agreed to travel yet. When the papers were done, Pritchard handed Silas a folded copy. "She is your ward under county placement. See that she is fed and kept decent." Abigail's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. Silas tucked the paper into his coat. "Come on, then." She followed him across the yard, her steps long and careful. At the trough, Buck lifted his head and snorted at her. Abigail held out one hand. The horse smelled her palm, then settled. Silas noticed that. "You afraid of horses?" he asked. "No." "Good, we have a long road." "To where?" "New Mexico, if the job still waits." "And if it does not?" Silas looked west, where the land shimmered under the afternoon sun like a promise that might burn a person alive. "Then we keep riding till something does." Abigail studied him for a long moment. "That is not much of a plan." "No," Silas said, "it is not." For the first time, something almost like a smile touched her mouth, but it vanished quickly, as if she did not trust it. Behind him, Abigail whispered so softly he nearly missed it. "Mr. Boone." He turned. She held her little bundle close. "Why did you stop?" Silas had no answer that would not open the nailed door inside him, so he gave the only truth he could manage. "Because nobody else did." Abigail looked down at the dust between them. The wind moved again, carrying church bells, wagon wheels, and the far cry of a hawk. Then she nodded once, like a person accepting a hard bargain. But as they walked toward the livery, Silas did not see the man in the black vest watching them from the shade of the general store, nor did he see that same man fold a county notice into his pocket and follow at a distance. By sundown, Silas Boone had traded away his spare blanket, his coffee tin, and a good pocket knife for a mule with one sleepy eye and a temper that showed only when someone pulled too hard on the reins. Abigail Mercer took the reins from him without complaint. "She has a crooked step," she said, looking down at the mule's front legs. "You noticed that quick." "I was raised around animals. A crooked step means you do not rush her." Silas gave a short nod. "Then we will not rush her." They left Red Willow with the sun dropping low behind them. The town bell rang once as they passed the last fence line, and Abigail turned in the saddle to look back. She did not wave. There was nobody there to wave at. Still, her eyes stayed on the town until it became only a brown shape behind the dust. Silas saw it, but he did not speak. Some grief was proud, some grief wanted privacy. They made camp near a dry wash, where a few mesquite trees leaned together like old men sharing secrets. Silas built a small fire, careful not to waste wood. Abigail unpacked her bundle and removed a folded dress, a comb with 2 missing teeth, a small Bible, and a square of cloth wrapped around something hard. She saw him notice it. "It was my father's," she said. Silas looked away, giving her the choice to say more or not. After a moment she unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a brass button, dull with age, from a soldier's coat. "He found it in Kansas when he was a boy," she said. said every lost thing ought to have someone remember it. She held it in her palm. The firelight touched the brass and made it shine for one small second. Silas swallowed. Sounds like he had a careful heart. He did. Her voice stayed even, but her thumb moved over the button again and again. He was not strong at the end. Fever took the weight off him first, then his voice. Near the last, I had to lean close to hear him. Silas poked the fire with a stick. Sparks lifted into the dark. What did he say? Abigail closed her fingers around the button. He told me not to let the world decide my worth just because it could not find a proper place for me. The words sat between them, heavy and bright. Silas looked across the fire at the tall girl in the too-short dress. She sat straight, as if her back had never learned how to bend beneath pity. He was right, Silas said. Abigail looked at him then, and for the first time that day, her eyes softened with something close to doubt. Most people do not think so. Most people do not think much at all. That almost brought a smile from her, but not quite. They ate beans from the same dented pot. Silas gave her the larger share and pretended not to. Abigail noticed and pretended not to notice. After supper, she washed the tin cups with sand and a little water, then set them upside down near the fire. You do things proper, Silas said. My father said poor folks cannot afford to be careless. Silas leaned back against his saddle. Your father had a saying for everything. Nearly, she pulled her shawl around her shoulders. Some of them were tiresome. This time she did smile. Small, quick, and gone before it fully lived. Silas felt something in his chest shift. Not joy, not yet. More like a board creaking in a house long thought empty. The night came cold. Coyotes cried somewhere beyond the wash. Buck slept with one hind leg bent. The mule, whom Abigail had already named Mercy with a dry little look that told Silas she knew exactly what kind of joke it was, stood near the mesquite and chewed at the brush. Silas offered Abigail his bedroll. She shook her head. You traded your blanket. I have slept colder. So have I. It was not stubbornness, not exactly. It was a warning. She would accept help if she must, but she would not be treated like a helpless burden. Silas understood that better than she knew. He spread the bedroll between them instead, half then. She studied him. You are not good at arguing. I am good at ending them. Abigail lowered herself onto one side of the bedroll, leaving a clear space between them. She wrapped her shawl tight and turned toward the fire. For a long while neither spoke. Then she said, Mr. Boone. Silas is fine. That would not be proper. He looked at the stars. Then Mr. Boone it is. Did you have children? The question was soft, but it struck him hard. Silas did not answer right away. The fire cracked. A coal broke open and glowed red at its heart. No, he said at last, not one that lived long enough. Abigail turned her face toward him, but he kept his eyes on the sky. I had a wife once. Her name was Mary Ellen. She was kind, kinder than I deserved most days. Cholera came through a settlement near Fort Griffin, took her and the baby before I could understand what was happening. Abigail was silent. Silas had not spoken those words in years. They felt strange in his mouth, like coins dug from dirt. I am sorry, she said. He nodded once. Was the baby a boy or a girl? We never knew. Abigail looked back toward the fire. Then maybe both names waited. Silas turned his head slightly. She pulled the shawl closer. My mother said when a child is expected, all the possible names gather around the house until one is chosen. Maybe your child had many names nearby. Silas shut his eyes. The pain did not leave. Pain like that did not obey kind words, but it changed shape for a moment. It became less like a knife and more like rain on old ground. Your mother said that. What I remember of her, I mostly remember in pieces, Abigail said. Her hands, her humming, the way she smelled like flower and lavender when there was lavender to be had, and that. Silas opened his eyes again. Those are good pieces. Yes, she whispered, they are. Across the wash, a twig snapped. Buck lifted his head. Silas sat up slowly. Abigail noticed and went still at once, not frightened, ready. Another sound came from the dark, a horse shifting, leather creaking. Silas reached for the rifle beside his saddle, but kept it low. He looked past the firelight into the black spaces between the mesquite trees. "Stay where you are," he said quietly. Abigail did not ask why. A shadow moved beyond the wash, too tall for brush and too still for an animal. Whoever it was had followed them far from Red Willow and waited until night to come close. Silas raised his voice, calm but hard. "Step into the light or ride on." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a man in a black vest walked forward, his face half-lit by the fire, his smile thin as a blade. "Evening, Boone," he said. "I believe you and that girl are carrying something that does not belong to you." The man in the black vest stood just beyond the fire, close enough for Silas to see the dust on his boots and far enough to think himself safe. Abigail did not move from the bedroll, but her hand closed around the brass button beneath her shawl. Silas kept the rifle across his knees. "I do not know you." "No," the man said, "but I know enough of you. Name is Everett Cole. I was in Red Willow today." "Then you had your chance to speak there." Cole smiled. "I prefer quiet roads to crowded churchyards." That told Silas plenty. Men who liked quiet roads often had business that could not stand daylight. "What do you want?" Silas asked. Cole's eyes shifted toward Abigail. They were pale eyes, restless and greedy, though his voice stayed smooth. The girl's father owed money. Abigail's chin lifted. "My father owed no man anything he did not mean to pay." "Meaning to pay does not settle a debt," Cole said. "George Mercer signed a note before he died. I have claim to what he left." Silas looked at Abigail's small bundle near the fire. One dress, one comb, one Bible, one wrapped button. "Does it look like he left a fortune?" Cole's smile thinned. "Not fortune papers." Abigail went very still. Silas noticed. Cole noticed too. "There," Cole said softly, "she knows." "I do not know what you're talking about," Abigail said. Her voice was steady, but too steady, like a cup filled to the brim and carried over rough ground. Cole stepped closer. Buck stamped near the wash. Silas raised the rifle just enough. "That is far enough," Silas said. Cole stopped, but his face hardened. "You paid $2 at a county table, and now you think you own trouble you do not understand." "I do not own her," Silas said, "and trouble has been finding me long before tonight." Cole glanced at the rifle, then at the dark road behind him. "Her father had a land letter, a claim paper from New Mexico. I know he carried it. The girl has it. I will pay fair for it." "I have no land paper," Abigail said. Cole gave a quiet laugh. "Child, lying does not fit you." Silas stood slowly. "You heard her." "I heard fear." "You heard my answer," Silas said. For a moment the night held its breath. The fire snapped low. Somewhere in the dark, Mercy the mule gave a soft, uneasy sound. Cole looked at Silas as if measuring whether one worn cowboy was worth the trouble. Then he stepped back and touched the brim of his hat. "This road is wide now," he said. "It gets narrower west of here." He turned and walked into the dark. A few moments later, a horse moved off across the hard ground, slow at first, then faster. Silas waited until the sound faded. Only then did he lower the rifle. Abigail remained seated, her face pale in the firelight. "Now," Silas said quietly, "you had better tell me what that was." She looked down at the bundle. "Abigail." Her eyes lifted. The sound of her name seemed to reach her more than his question. "My father had a paper," she said. Silas sat back down, leaving the rifle near his hand. "What kind?" "A claim, not land exactly. A promise of land. He said a man he helped during a winter storm gave it to him. It was for a small place near Silver Mesa, New Mexico. My father thought we could start again there." "And Cole wants it." "Yes." "Why?" "I do not know," she swallowed. "But before my father died, a man came to our wagon at night. I never saw his face clear. I heard them arguing. Father told him he would not sell what was meant to build a home." Silas stared into the fire. The West was full of papers that meant nothing, and papers men would lie, cheat, and kill for. Sometimes there was no telling which kind of paper was until trouble started circling it. "Where is it?" he asked. Abigail hesitated. Silas did not soften his voice. "If we are being followed for it, I need the truth." Her hand trembled only once as she opened the little Bible. From between the back cover and the lining, she pulled a folded paper, yellowed at the edges and tied with a thin string. Silas took it carefully. He could read, but not fast, and the firelight was poor. Still, he made out enough. A parcel near Silver Mesa, a witness mark, a survey line, a name that was not George Mercer, then another line assigning rights to him. "This may be worth something," Silas said. "To me it was not money." Abigail's voice dropped. "It was where my father meant to take me." The words struck harder than she likely meant them to. Silas looked at her sitting there in the cold, too tall for her dress, too young for the calm she kept forcing onto her face. "He told me," she continued, "that if anything happened I should keep it hidden. He said a home is not a home until somebody protects it." Her mouth tightened. "I was supposed to protect it." Silas folded the paper and handed it back. "You did." "No, I ended up in a churchyard with strangers looking me over like a lame horse." Silas did not answer quickly. A soft answer would have been easy and useless. "You survived the road," he said. "You kept the paper, you kept your father's wish alive. That is protection." Abigail looked away, but not before he saw tears shine in her eyes. She wiped them fast, angry at them for existing. The fire burned lower. Silas added 2 sticks and watched them catch. "We ride before dawn." "To Silver Mesa." "To the ranch job first. We need wages, shelter, and friends if Cole is still behind us. A paper is easier to keep when your stomach is full and your horse is fed." She nodded slowly. Then in a smaller voice she said, "Do you wish you had not stopped?" Silas looked at her. The question was plain, but the hurt beneath it was deep. She was not asking about the danger. She was asking whether she had become too much. "No," he said, "but I do wish you had told me. I thought if you knew, you might hand me back." That angered him, not at her, but at every person who had taught her such a thought. "I paid $2, he said, "not for a bundle, not for a paper, and not for an easy road. I stepped forward. That means I do not step back just because trouble comes wearing a clean vest." Abigail held his gaze for a long moment. The tears did not fall, but something in her face changed. Not trust, not fully. Trust did not grow in one night, but perhaps one small root of it found dirt. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because some promises are not made with pretty words. Some are made beside a low fire, with danger waiting in the dark. Later, when Abigail slept at last, Silas sat awake with the rifle across his lap. The moon rose thin and white over the mesquite. Near dawn, he found fresh hoofprints by the wash. Cole had not ridden far. He had only waited. They rode before the sun broke open over the flat land. The morning was cold enough to turn Abigail's fingers stiff around Mercy's reins. A pale line of light sat low in the east, and the mesquite shadows stretched thin across the ground. Silas rode ahead at first, watching the road, then dropped back beside her when the trail widened. Neither spoke for a long while. Abigail kept her father's paper hidden inside the lining of her Bible again, but now the Bible sat under her shawl instead of in the bundle. Every few minutes her hand touched it, not with fear exactly, but with the need to feel that it was still there. Silas noticed and said nothing. By mid-morning the country began to change. The brown flats lifted into long, broken hills. Dry grass whispered against the animals' legs. Far off, blue mountains sat like a promise no one had yet earned. The trail bent west and old wagon ruts cut through the hard earth. Silas watched the ground more than the sky. Abigail finally said, "You think he is still behind us?" "I know he is." "How?" "Tracks stayed with us until the road split. Then they disappeared where the ground turned rocky." "That means he could have gone another way." "It means he wanted us to think that." She looked toward the empty ridge to their left. "You talk like you have done this before." "I have been followed before. By men like him. By worse, also by better. It is not always easy to tell the difference until they show their hand." Abigail was quiet after that. Near noon, they stopped by a narrow creek that held more stones than water. Silas let the animals drink first. Abigail knelt to fill the canteen, and her sleeves slipped back, showing red marks on her wrists where the two short cuffs had rubbed the skin raw. Silas saw them. "You need a proper dress," he said. She pulled her sleeves down quickly. "This one is proper enough." "It is too small." "I know that." The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. Abigail turned away as if ashamed of it. Silas capped the canteen. "I did not mean to make you feel poorly." "You did not." She stared at the thin water moving over the stones. "It is just that people talk about it like I grew tall to trouble them, like I chose wrong." Silas leaned against a cottonwood trunk. A tree does not apologize for reaching up. Abigail looked at him. He shrugged. "That may be the only wise thing I say all week, so remember it." This time she smiled without hiding it so fast. It was small, but real. The kind of smile that seemed strange on her face only because life had not given her enough practice. They crossed into New Mexico territory 2 days later under a sky washed white by heat. Silas sold his watch chain in a dusty settlement for flour, bacon, beans, thread, and a length of plain brown cloth. Abigail argued when she saw the cloth. "You need supplies more than I need that." "I bought both." "You sold something." "It was only a chain." "Was it your wife's?" The question stopped him. Silas tied the sack closed slower than needed. "No, mine." "But it mattered." He looked at her then. She was not prying. She was counting the cost, the way people did when they had been made to feel like every kindness toward them was a debt. "It mattered less than warm sleeves," he said. Abigail did not answer. She took the cloth and held it carefully, as if it might tear from being wanted too much. That evening she sat beside the fire and mended her dress with the new cloth, adding length to the sleeves and hem. Her stitches were neat, though the light was poor. Silas sat across from her, sharpening nothing with a small stone because his knife was gone. She noticed. "You traded the knife for mercy." "I did." "You have made several poor bargains since meeting me." "Maybe." He looked at the mule, who had one ear turned toward them as if insulted. "But Mercy and I are growing fond of each other." Abigail laughed once. It startled a night bird from the brush. The sound faded quickly, but Silas held it in his heart longer than he meant to. On the 5th day, they reached the wide valley outside Silver Mesa. The town was smaller than Red Willow but stronger looking, with false front stores, a church with a leaning bell, and a main street packed hard by wagon wheels. Beyond it, a ranch spread across the land, its fences running toward the hills like dark thread. That is Crosswind Ranch, Silas said. Man named Thomas Bell owns it. If his letter still means anything, we may sleep under a roof tonight. Abigail looked toward the ranch house where cottonwoods shaded the porch. And if he says no? Silas looked at her with one eyebrow raised. She sighed. We keep riding till something does. You learn fast. The ranch yard was busy when they rode in. 2 hands were repairing a wagon wheel. A woman in a blue work dress carried a basket of wet laundry from the pump. Chickens scattered in front of Buck. A big yellow dog barked once, then decided the matter was not worth more effort and lay back down. Thomas Bell came out of the barn wiping his hands on a rag. He was broad, gray-bearded and sunburned, with eyes that missed little. Silas Boone, he called. That is me. You are late. Rode had opinions. Bell's gaze moved to Abigail. He did not stare at her height, not exactly, but he noticed. Everyone did. And this. Abigail Mercer, my ward. The word felt strange in the yard, but Silas said it steady. The woman with the laundry stopped by the porch. She looked at Abigail for a long moment. Her face softened, not with pity but with recognition. Bell scratched his beard. My letter asked for a hand, not a family. Silas kept his voice calm. Then tell me straight if there is no place. Abigail sat still on Mercy, her shoulders squared. Silas could feel the old churchyard silence gathering around her again. The woman stepped down from the porch. Tom. Bell looked back. She can stay in the house tonight, the woman said. No child sleeps in a barn while I have floors. Abigail's mouth tightened at the word child, but she said nothing. Bell looked from his wife to Silas, then back again. Whatever passed between them had been practiced over years of marriage. One night, Bell said, we talk after supper. Fair, Silas replied. The woman came closer. I am Martha Bell. Abigail Mercer, ma'am. Martha smiled. I heard, come inside, you look like the wind has been chewing on you. Abigail glanced at Silas. He gave a small nod. She climbed down from Mercy with care, one hand still holding the Bible beneath her shawl. As she followed Martha toward the house, a young ranch hand near the wagon wheel muttered something under his breath. Silas did not hear the words, but he heard the tone. Abigail heard it too. She did not stop walking. Silas turned his head and looked at the young hand, until the boy dropped his eyes to the wagon wheel. That night's supper was thick stew, corn bread, and canned peaches Martha had saved for company. Abigail ate slowly at first, then with quiet hunger she could not hide. Martha noticed and gave her more without speaking of it. After supper, Bell asked Abigail what work she knew. She answered plain, cooking, mending, animals, garden, reading numbers enough to keep accounts if shown the method. Bell leaned back in his chair. You read accounts. My father taught me sums. What else did he teach you? Abigail looked down at her hands, to keep what matters safe. Silas felt the words settle over the table. Before anyone could ask more, a knock came at the front door. 3 hard knocks. Martha frowned. At this hour. Silas's hand moved under the table, toward the pistol Bell had let him borrow after hearing about the road. Thomas Bell opened the door. Everett Cole stood on the porch, hat in hand, smiling like a man invited to supper. Evening, Cole said. I am looking for a tall girl carrying stolen property. For a moment, nobody in the Bell house moved. The stew pot still steamed on the table. The lantern above it gave a soft yellow light. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, and Everett Cole stood in the doorway as if he had every right to bring darkness inside with him. Thomas Bell did not invite him in. Stolen property, Bell said, his voice low. Cole kept his hat in both hands, playing the part of a polite man. A document belonging to an estate matter. The girl's father carried it. It was not his to pass on. Abigail sat straight in her chair. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were hard. "That is a lie," she said. Martha Bell turned toward her, and Silas saw the older woman's hand move to the back of Abigail's chair, not touching her, just near enough to say she was not alone. Cole looked past Bell into the room. "Miss Mercer, grief can confuse a young mind. I do not blame you." Abigail rose so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "My mind is not confused." Silas stood too. "Careful, Cole." Cole's polite smile stayed fixed, but a little anger showed at the corners. "This is not your concern, Boone. You bought yourself a ward, not a lawsuit." Bell's face changed at that. It was a small change, but every ranch hand in the room felt it. "Do not say bought in my house," Bell said. Cole's eyes flicked to him. "I mean no insult." "Then choose better words." The room settled into silence again. Cole reached into his coat and removed a folded paper. "I have a signed statement saying George Mercer owed money against a claim near this territory. If the girl carries the land letter, she carries what belongs to his creditors." Silas watched Abigail closely. She did not look frightened now. She looked wounded. That was worse. "My father did not gamble," she said. "He did not drink away money. He did not cheat men." Cole sighed softly. "Good men still owe debts." Martha spoke then, "And bad men sometimes invent them." Cole turned his head toward her, surprised. Martha Bell was not tall like Abigail. She was small, round-faced and gray at the temples, with flour still on one sleeve. But in that moment she looked rooted deep enough that no wind could move her. Cole gave a thin bow. "Ma'am, I am only asking for what the law will give me sooner or later." Bell held out his hand. "Let me see that statement." Cole hesitated. Bell's eyebrows lifted. "You came to my porch talking law. Show paper." After a moment, Cole handed it over. Bell carried it to the lantern and read slowly. Silas could see from the way his eyes narrowed that something was wrong. He passed it to Martha, who read faster. "This says George Mercer borrowed $40 from a man named Nathaniel Pike," Martha said. "That is correct," Cole replied. Abigail frowned. "I never heard that name." Martha looked at the date. This was signed 3 days after her father died. The words fell like a stone into a well. Cole's face tightened. Silas took one step forward. "You want to explain how a dead man signed a debt." Cole reached for the paper, but Bell folded it and kept it in his own hand. "I was given that document in good faith," Cole said. "By who?" Bell asked. "That is private business." "Not on my porch." Cole's smile was gone now. What stood in its place was colder and more honest. "You folks would do well not to stand between a claim and men who intend to have it." There it was. The clean vest had finally opened enough to show the dirt beneath. Bell stepped onto the porch, forcing Cole to move back. "You are done here tonight." Cole looked toward Abigail one last time. "That paper will not build you a home, girl. It will bring you nothing but grief." Abigail's hands shook at her sides, but her voice did not. "Then it will be my grief." Cole stared at her. Then he put his hat on and walked into the dark. Bell watched until the sound of his horse faded. Then he shut the door and slid the bolt into place. For a long moment, everyone heard only the lantern's faint hiss. Then Abigail sat down slowly. All the strength seemed to leave her at once. She did not cry. She only placed both hands flat on the table as if the wood could hold her steady. Martha came beside her. "Child." Abigail shook her head. "Please do not be kind yet. I will break if you are kind yet." Martha stopped. Her face softened, but she respected the words. Silas felt them cut through him. He had known men who could take hunger, cold, and pain without a sound, but kindness after long loneliness could bring them to their knees. So he did not speak gently, he spoke plain. "You did well." Abigail looked at him. You stood straight, you told the truth, that is not small. Her mouth trembled once, she pressed it firm. Belle set Cole's false paper on the table. You two are not leaving in the morning. Silas looked up. I will not bring trouble to your door. It is already at my door, Belle said. Better here where I can see it. Martha nodded. The girl stays in the house. You can take the spare room off the kitchen, Abigail. It is small, but the window catches morning light. Abigail looked from Martha to Belle, then to Silas. She seemed unsure what to do with being defended by people who owed her nothing. If you believe one act of kindness can change a life, remember this moment, because Abigail is learning that a home is sometimes built first by the people who refuse to let you stand alone. Later, after the dishes were washed, Martha gave Abigail a nightdress and a quilt with faded blue squares. Abigail accepted both with stiff thanks, but when she entered the little room off the kitchen, she stopped. There was a bed. A real bed, narrow but clean, with a white pillow and a small table beside it. On the table sat a cracked blue vase holding one sprig of dried lavender. Abigail stared at it. Martha stood in the doorway. It is not much. Abigail touched the edge of the quilt. It is more than I have had in a long while. Martha's eyes shone, but she only said, sleep then. Silas remained in the kitchen after Martha left. Abigail stood near her door, the Bible clutched to her chest. Mr. Boone, she said. He turned. If those men take the claim, my father's last wish is gone. Silas looked at the false debt paper on the table, then toward the dark window where his own reflection stared back tired and grim. No, he said, a man's last wish is not gone just because thieves reach for it. Before Abigail could answer, a horse screamed outside. Not a human scream, not a sound of death, but the high, terrified cry of an animal startled in the dark. Silas grabbed the pistol and ran for the door. By the time he reached the yard, the barn lantern was swinging wildly in the wind. The corral gate hung open, and Mercy the mule was gone. Silas ran across the yard with Thomas Bell close behind him, both men half-dressed for sleep and wide awake with anger. The barn lantern swung from its hook, throwing wild light over the open corral. Buck was still there, tossing his head and pulling against the rail. Two of Bell's horses crowded the far fence, snorting hard, their eyes bright with fear, but Mercy's stall was empty. Abigail reached the yard barefoot, Martha's quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair had come loose from its braid, and the night wind pulled it across her face. She is gone, Abigail asked. Silas did not answer right away. He was already kneeling by the gate, touching the dirt where fresh tracks cut across older ones. One rider, he said, led her out. Bell lifted the lantern and stepped closer. Looks like he went north toward the creek bed. Abigail gripped the quilt tighter. Cole. Likely, Silas said. I should have watched her. Silas stood and turned sharply. No. But she was mine to ride. She was stolen by a grown man in the dark. That is not your failing. Abigail looked toward the black line of hills beyond the yard. Her face had the same hard stillness he had seen at the church steps, but this time he knew what sat under it. Fear, guilt, the old belief that every loss proved she had not held tight enough. Bell handed Silas the lantern. We will track at first light. Silas shook his head. At first light the trail will be cold. Then we ride now. Martha stepped into the yard carrying Silas's coat, not with the girl standing barefoot in the dirt and half the ranch asleep. Abigail straightened. I am going. No, Silas said. Her eyes flashed. Mercy is gone because of my paper. If you ride after her, I ride too. You do not give orders here. I am not trying to. I am telling you I will not sit in a warm room while someone else pays for what follows me. The words struck him harder than he expected. He wanted to argue. He wanted to send her inside, bolt the door, and keep her safe from every hard thing riding toward them. But safety forced on a person could feel a great deal like another kind of cage. Martha saw his struggle and spoke softly. "At least put boots on the child." "I am not a child," Abigail said, but her voice broke slightly on the last word. Martha walked to her, held out the boots, and said, "Tonight you are a person with cold feet. That is all I meant." Abigail stared at her, then took the boots. Within minutes, Silas, Belle, and Abigail rode out with one lantern, one rifle, and the moon thin above them. Abigail rode behind Silas on Buck, sitting steady even without a saddle of her own. Belle rode beside them, his face set like stone. The tracks led north, just as Belle had said. They crossed a patch of dry grass, dipped into a shallow creek bed, then turned west along the stones where tracking grew harder. Whoever had taken Mercy knew enough to hide his trail, but not enough to hide it from men who had spent half their lives reading dirt. Abigail leaned forward. "There." Silas pulled Buck short. "What?" She pointed toward a greasewood bush. A small thread of brown cloth fluttered from a thorn. "My sleeve," she said, "from the cloth you bought." Silas got down and lifted it. The piece had been torn clean and tied there on purpose. Belle cursed under his breath. "He is marking a trail." "No," Silas said, "he is leaving bait." Abigail's breath caught. "For me." "For all of us." The night seemed to grow wider around them. Every rock and bush looked like a place a man could hide. Silas looked at the dark ridge ahead and felt old instincts wake in him, the kind that came from cattle drives, border towns, and bad nights when a man lived because he listened before he moved. "We turn back," he said. Abigail stared at him. "But Mercy. He wants us away from the ranch." "Then why steal a mule?" "To see who follows." Silas looked at Belle. "And to leave the house thinner guarded." Belle's face changed. "Martha." They wheeled the horses around. The ride back felt twice as long. Abigail said nothing, but Silas could feel her trembling behind him, not from cold now, from understanding. When the ranch lights came into view, the house still stood quiet. No flames, no shouting, no broken door. Belle rode ahead, calling softly. A lantern appeared in the kitchen window. Martha opened the door with a shotgun in her hands and fury in her eyes. "You scared 10 years off my life," she told her husband. Belle climbed down and took her shoulders. "Cole meant to draw us off. I thought as much when the dog started growling at the back fence." Silas turned toward the fence line. The yellow dog stood there now, stiff and silent. Near the back gate, they found a second sign. A folded paper had been pinned to the wood with a small nail. Silas pulled it loose and carried it to the kitchen, where Martha raised the lantern. The message was written in a neat hand. "Bring the land letter to the dry chapel by sundown tomorrow, or the next thing taken will not be a mule." Abigail read it once, then again. The color drained from her face. Martha reached for her, but Abigail stepped back. "No," Abigail whispered. "No more. I will give him the paper." Silas looked at her. "That is fear talking." "That is sense talking." Her voice rose, not loud but wounded. "Mercy is gone. Your life is in danger. Their home is in danger. All because I kept a paper for land I have never seen." Silas placed the note on the table. "Your father gave you more than paper. He gave me a burden. He gave you a future." Abigail shook her head. Tears stood in her eyes now, and this time she could not force them away. "What good is a future if everyone near me suffers for it?" No one answered at once. Then a quiet voice came from the kitchen doorway. It was the young ranch hand who had muttered the day Abigail arrived. His name was Luke Harper, and he stood with his hat crushed in both hands, shame written plain across his face. "I know where the dry chapel is," he said, "and I know why Cole wants that claim." Silas turned slowly. "Start talking." Luke swallowed hard. There is water under that land, not a little. A spring line. My brother works survey for the territory office. Men have been buying every claim around Silver Mesa, but Miss Mercer's claim sits right over the heart of it. Abigail gripped the back of a chair. Luke looked at her, his face red with regret. I said something low when you came in. I am sorry for it. Truth is, you may be holding the one piece of land half this county is thirsty for. Silas looked down at Cole's note again. Outside, the wind pushed against the kitchen walls. And far away in the dark, a mule brayed once, faint and lonely, from somewhere beyond the ridge. The mule's bray came again, thin and far off, carried by the night wind like a cry through a keyhole. Abigail turned toward the sound so fast the chair scraped behind her. Mercy, she whispered. Silas caught her arm before she could reach the door. Not blind, not angry, that is how men like Cole get what they want. She looked at his hand on her sleeve, then at his face. For a heartbeat, he thought she might pull away. Instead, she stood trembling beneath his grip, fighting herself harder than she was fighting him. She is tied somewhere, Abigail said. She is scared. I know. You do not. Silas let go slowly. You are right, I do not know that mule, but I know bait when I hear it. Thomas Bell stood by the window with the lantern turned low. Dry Chapel is 5 miles west, old Mission Place, roof half gone. Folks stopped using it years back after the creek shifted. Luke Harper nodded. There are cottonwoods near it. A man could hide 3 horses in that wash, and you would not see them until you were on top of them. Martha folded Cole's note and laid it beside the false debt paper. Then, nobody rides there just to hand over what he wants. Abigail looked at the table. Her Bible lay there, the claim hidden inside. A small book, a thin paper, and now half the room seemed to bend around it. Luke took one careful step forward. Miss Mercer, my brother's name is Daniel. He copies survey records in Silver Mesa. He told me there was talk about spring land, but I did not think on it until tonight. If we can get your claim to the land office before Cole does, they can mark it proper. Can they stop him? Abigail asked. Luke hesitated. If the papers are true and witnessed, maybe. Maybe, she repeated. Silas heard himself in her voice from the road to Red Willow. The same hard little word, the same poor shelter against fear. Bell rubbed his jaw. Land office opens at sunup. Cole wants the paper by sundown. That gives us 1 day. Martha's eyes moved from face to face. Then we use the day. Silas looked at Abigail. You and Martha go to the land office at first light. Bell and I ride to the chapel after sunrise, careful. Luke stays near the ranch. Abigail's back stiffened. No. Silas sighed. I expected that. I am not being sent away while Mercy is tied out there. You are not being sent away. You are taking the claim where it can be protected. And if Cole follows me, he cannot follow everyone at once. Abigail folded her arms. You think he will follow you because you are men, and he believes the paper will be with you. That is the hope. No, she said. He watched me in Red Willow. He came to this house asking for me. He knows my father gave the paper to me. If I am not at the chapel, he may know it is a trick. Silas did not like that she was right. Martha leaned against the stove, quiet for a moment. Then perhaps the girl should be seen riding west. Silas turned. Martha. I did not say alone. Her voice was calm. Let Cole think Abigail carries the Bible to the chapel. Let him watch that road. Meanwhile, the real paper goes to town another way. Abigail's eyes narrowed. A copy. Not a copy, Martha said. A decoy. She took the Bible gently, with Abigail's permission given by a small nod, and opened the back lining. The claim paper came out, yellow and fragile. Abigail watched it as if Martha held her father's hand. Martha placed it flat on the table and looked at Silas. Can you ride fast to Silver Mesa before dawn? Silas nodded. On Buck, yes. Abigail stared at him. You would take it. I would take it to the land office and put it in Daniel Harper's hands if we can find him. Belle can ride with you toward the chapel carrying the Bible with another folded paper inside. No, Abigail said quickly. If Cole finds out the Bible is empty, he may hurt you. Belle gave a dry snort. Girl, I have been married to Martha Bell for 26 years. A thief with a bad temper does not frighten me half so much as disappointing my wife. Martha looked at him. Wise answer. No one laughed loudly, but something eased in the room, just enough for people to breathe again. Abigail looked at Silas. What if you do not come back? The question was bare. No pride covered it this time. Silas reached into his coat and pulled out the folded county placement paper from Red Willow. He set it beside the land claim. Then you keep that too, he said. It says I stepped forward. Paper or no paper, that truth remains. Abigail's face changed. For a second she looked 14 in a way she rarely allowed herself to look. Young, afraid, tired of losing people on roads. You cannot say things like that and then ride into danger, she whispered. Silas wanted to tell her there was no danger. That would have been a lie, and she had been lied to enough. So he said, I can only promise I will ride careful. Before dawn, the house moved in silence. Martha sewed a false fold into the Bible and slipped in an old tax notice, tied to look important. Belle loaded his rifle but wrapped it in a blanket, so from a distance he looked like a man carrying bedrolls. Luke saddled 2 horses with hands that still shook from shame and purpose. Abigail stood in the kitchen with the real claim in both hands. She did not give it to Silas at first. My father said this was home, she said. Silas held her gaze. Then I will carry it like one. At last she handed it over. Their fingers touched for one brief moment. Her hand was cold. Silas tucked the claim deep inside his shirt, beneath his vest. Then he mounted Buck and rode east toward Silver Mesa while the sky was still black. But when he reached the first bend past the cottonwoods, he saw fresh tracks cutting across the road ahead. 2 riders, waiting between him and town. Silas pulled Buck into the shadow of a cottonwood and held still. The 2 riders waited ahead where the road narrowed between a wash and a wall of pale stone. They had chosen the place well. A man riding fast toward town would not see them until he was nearly under their guns. The first rider sat easy in the saddle. The second kept shifting, which told Silas he was either nervous or young. Buck breathed warm air through his nose. Silas laid one hand on the horse's neck. Easy, he whispered. The claim paper rested beneath his vest like a hot coal. Silas looked back the way he had come. The ranch was hidden behind low ground now. Abigail and Belle would be riding west soon with the false Bible, trusting him to reach Silver Mesa. Martha would be watching the yard with a shotgun and a prayer she would never admit to saying. Luke Harper would be waiting by the barn, trying to make one mistake right. And Abigail had asked him, what if he did not come back? Silas pushed that memory down. A man could not ride well with fear sitting in his hands. He studied the land. The main road was blocked, but the wash curved south through dry reeds and stone. It would slow him, and Buck would have to pick his way carefully, but it might carry them around the riders. Silas eased Buck backward one step at a time, then turned him toward the wash. A stone slipped under the horse's hoof. The sound was small. Still, one rider turned his head. Boone, a voice called. Silas did not wait. He leaned low and sent Buck down into the wash. The horse stumbled once, caught himself, and lunged forward. Behind them, a gunshot cracked the morning open. The bullet struck stone high above Silas's shoulder, spraying dust into his face. Buck ran. The wash twisted like a snake through the land. Branches whipped Silas's coat. Dry reeds slapped his legs. Another shot rang out farther behind now. Silas did not look back. He knew looking back stole speed. At the far end of the wash, he climbed a sandy bank and came out on open ground east of the road. Silver Mesa lay ahead, its church steeple barely visible in the gray light. "Come on, boy," Silas murmured. Buck stretched into a full run. Behind him, the riders shouted, but their horses had lost the angle. By the time the first sunlight touched the town roofs, Silas was already on Main Street, covered in dust and breathing hard. He rode straight to the land office. The door was still locked. Silas swung down and hammered on it with his fist. "Open up." A sleepy voice answered from above. "Office opens at 8. Silas looked down the street. No riders yet, but they would come. He hammered again. "Daniel Harper, you in there?" A window opened over the office. A young man with rumpled hair and spectacles leaned out, blinking. "Who is asking?" "Silas Boone. Your brother Luke sent me. Abigail Mercer has a claim paper men are trying to steal." That woke him. The window shut. A minute later, the front door opened, and Daniel Harper stood there pulling suspenders over his shirt. He was thinner than Luke, with ink stains on his fingers and a face made anxious by too much reading of other men's lies. "Inside," Daniel said. Silas stepped in and pulled the claim from beneath his vest. Daniel took it to the desk and lit a lamp with shaking hands. He read fast, then slower, then reached for a large record book from the shelf. "This is real," Daniel said. "Can you file it?" "I can enter it, but the registrar has to seal it." "Where is he?" "Home, likely still asleep." "Wake him." Daniel looked up. "Mr. Boone, if men are after this, they may have already tried to cloud the record." "Then wake him faster." Daniel grabbed his coat and ran. Silas stood alone in the office, listening to Buck outside and the blood beating in his ears. The room smelled of paper, dust, and lamp oil. Shelves lined the walls. Every claim, every boundary, every hope of a home reduced to ink and signatures. On Daniel's desk sat a map of the Silver Mesa Valley. Silas leaned over it. There it was. Mercer claim. A narrow stretch near the old creek bed, boxed in by land already marked under other names. Those names repeated on the parcels around it. Pike, Cole, Pike again. A company name too, written in a careful hand. Silas understood then. They did not want Abigail's land because it was large. They wanted it because it was the missing piece. Without her claim, their holdings did not connect. Without her spring, their dry acres stayed dry. The door opened behind him. Silas turned, expecting Daniel. Everett Cole stepped inside instead. His black vest was buttoned neat. His pale eyes moved first to Silas, then to the desk, then to the open map. "You ride well for a man carrying another person's future," Cole said. Silas reached for the borrowed pistol. Cole lifted his own first, slowly. Silas froze. Cole smiled without warmth. "The girl should have handed it over. I gave her every chance." "You forged a debt against a dead man." "I did not forge it." Cole's mouth twitched. "I paid for it. There is a difference in business." "Not in judgment." Cole stepped closer. "You think this is about one orphan and her sentimental paper? That spring will make this valley. Farms, cattle, a town bigger than this one. Men with vision see what lonely fools do not. Men with vision do not steal from children." Cole's eyes hardened. She is not a child when she is standing in the way of progress. The words chilled Silas more than the pistol. Outside, a horse came hard down the street. Cole glanced toward the window. That was all Silas needed. He grabbed the heavy record book and shoved it across the desk. It struck Cole's arm as the pistol fired, sending the shot into the ceiling. Silas lunged. They crashed into the shelves. Papers burst loose and fell like frightened birds. Cole struck Silas across the jaw with the pistol barrel. Silas staggered, tasting blood, but drove his shoulder into Cole's ribs and slammed him against the wall. The door flew open. Daniel Harper stood there with an older man in a night coat and 2 town deputies behind him. Cole stopped fighting. Silas held him pinned, breathing hard. Daniel saw the pistol on the floor, the scattered papers, and the hole in the ceiling. Registrar, that is Everett Cole. He tried to take a claim before it could be entered. Cole straightened his vest as if dignity could save him. That is a false accusation. The older registrar stepped to the desk, lifted Abigail's claim, and studied the signatures. Then he looked at the map. "I have seen enough of your company's filings, Mr. Cole," he said coldly. "Deputies, keep him here." Cole's face went gray. Silas wiped blood from his mouth. "Seal the girl's claim." The registrar looked at him for one long moment, then took up his stamp. The sound of it hitting paper was small. But to Silas, it sounded like a door opening. If you have ever believed one honest paper, one brave choice, or one person standing firm could change a life, hold that thought close. Abigail's fight is not over yet, but her father's dream has finally reached daylight. By the time Silas rode back toward Crosswind Ranch, the sun was high and his jaw ached with every breath. The sealed claim rested safe in Daniel Harper's office. But as he reached the ridge above the dry chapel, he saw smoke rising from the cottonwoods. And below it, Abigail stood alone in the chapel yard, facing a man with a rifle. Silas pulled Buck behind the ridge and slid from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped. Below him, the dry chapel sat in a bowl of dust and cottonwood shade. Its roof had fallen in years ago, leaving only broken beams pointing at the sky. One wall still held a cracked wooden cross, gray from weather and leaning to one side. Smoke curled from a small fire near the trees. Mercy stood tied there, ears back, alive but nervous. Thomas Bell was on the ground beside the chapel steps, sitting up with one hand pressed to his shoulder. He was hurt but breathing. His rifle lay too far from him. And Abigail stood in the open yard. Her Bible was in her hands. A man Silas did not know faced her with a rifle. He was older than Cole, heavy through the middle, with a silver beard and a fine coat that looked wrong in such a ruined place. 2 riders waited near the cottonwoods. Silas crouched low and moved down through the rocks. He was halfway to the chapel when the older man spoke. "You have courage, Miss Mercer," the man said. "I will grant you that." Abigail's voice carried clearly in the still air. "I did not come for your praise." "No, you came for a mule." The man glanced toward Mercy. "And for Mr. Bell, once my men persuaded him to sit down." Bell's jaw tightened. "You have made your point, Pike." Silas stopped behind a low stone wall. "Pike." So this was Nathaniel Pike, the name from the false debt paper. Not a shadow, not a rumor. A real man standing in daylight with a rifle pointed at a girl. Abigail lifted the Bible. "You wanted this." Pike smiled. "I wanted what is inside it." "You sent Cole to frighten me." "I sent Cole to make a fair arrangement. He lacks grace, but he is useful." "My father is dead because of men like you." Pike's smile faded. "Your father died of fever. After being chased from camp to camp. After men came to our wagon at night. After he stopped sleeping because he was afraid someone would steal the only future he had left for me." The chapel yard went quiet. Silas saw Pike's hand shift on the rifle. Not guilt, irritation. "Your father was stubborn," Pike said. "He had a paper he did not understand. He understood it was ours. A child's word does not carry much weight." Abigail stepped forward 1 pace. "Then hear a daughter's word. You will not have it." Pike gave a soft sigh. "Miss Mercer, do not mistake this old chapel for a stage where virtue wins because it speaks firmly. Out here, Land belongs to those strong enough to keep it. Silas moved again, slow and silent. Bell saw him. The older rancher's eyes flickered only once, then lowered. He understood. He drew Pike's attention by coughing hard and leaning to one side. Pike looked at him. "Stay still." Bell gave a bitter smile. "Hard to be still with your man's rifle mark burning my shoulder." Abigail's face twisted with worry, but she did not turn away from Pike. Silas reached the back wall of the chapel. One of Pike's riders stood 10 yards to his right, watching the road instead of the ruins. Silas picked up a loose stone and threw it into the brush behind the man. The rider turned. Silas crossed the distance in 3 quiet steps, took hold of the rifle barrel and pulled it down. The man stumbled. Silas struck him once in the stomach with his elbow, not hard enough to ruin him, but enough to fold him over without a shout. He lowered the man to the ground and took the rifle. The second rider heard something and turned his horse. Bell moved. With a grunt of pain, he kicked dust toward the horse's legs. The animal startled sideways, and the rider fought the reins. Pike swung his rifle toward Bell. "Enough." That was when Silas stepped from the broken chapel wall, with the borrowed rifle ready. "Drop it, Pike." Abigail turned her head. For one brief second, all the fear she had been hiding showed plain on her face. Silas looked at her, then at Pike. "It is done. Cole is held in town. The claim is filed and sealed. Daniel Harper and the registrar both saw it." Pike's face changed, as if the sun had gone out behind his eyes. Abigail stared at Silas. "Filed." He nodded once. "Your father's paper is safe." Her hands tightened on the Bible. The book she carried was only a decoy now, but to her it had carried every mile of grief. Pike lowered the rifle slowly but did not drop it. "You think a seal ends this?" "No," Silas said, "but it starts the part where honest witnesses speak." From the road came the sound of more horses. For a moment, Silas feared Pike had other men. Then Martha Bell rode into view on a brown mare, sitting straight as Sunday judgment, with Luke Harper beside her and 2 deputies behind them. Dust covered Martha's blue dress. Her shotgun rested across her lap. Thomas Bell stared at his wife. "Martha, what in creation are you doing here?" "Cleaning up after foolish men," she said. One deputy called out, "Nathaniel Pike, set down that rifle." Pike looked from Silas to Abigail, then to the deputies. His hand tightened. For one bad heartbeat, Silas thought pride would make the man choose ruin. But Nathaniel Pike was not brave. He was only greedy. The rifle dropped into the dust. The deputies moved in. Pike's riders gave up quickly once they saw the law and the ranchers together. Bell was helped to his feet, pale but steady. Martha reached him and touched his face, her anger breaking just enough to show the love underneath. Abigail walked to Mercy and untied her. The mule pressed her nose against Abigail's shoulder as if complaining about the entire affair. Abigail closed her eyes and held the animal's face with both hands. Silas stood a few steps away, suddenly tired. She turned to him. "You came back." "I said I would ride careful." "That is not what you said." "No," he admitted, "but it was what I meant." Her eyes filled, and this time she did not wipe the tears away. She crossed the yard and stopped before him, still holding the Bible. "My father's claim is filed." "Yes." "And Cole cannot take it." "Not without fighting the whole town now." She looked down at the dust. "I thought I had lost it." "You did not." "I thought I had lost you too." The words were so quiet he nearly wished he had not heard them, because they opened something in him he had spent years keeping shut. Before he could answer, Pike laughed from where the deputies held him. "You fools think this makes a family," he said. "A drifter, an unwanted girl, and a dead man's paper." Silas took one step toward him, but Abigail moved first. She did not shout, she did not tremble. She looked straight at Pike and said, "No, it was never the paper that made it." Then she turned back to Silas. And in front of the ruined chapel, with the sealed claim waiting in town and the past still breathing behind them, Abigail Mercer asked the one question Silas Boone feared most. "When this is over, Mr. Boone, will you still have a place for me?" Silas Boone did not answer Abigail right away. The ruined chapel stood quiet around them. Dust moved over the old stones. Mercy breathed against Abigail's shoulder. Thomas Bell leaned on Martha, pretending he needed less help than he did. The deputies tied Pike's hands and led him toward the horses, while the man's fine coat gathered dust at the hem. But Abigail did not look at any of that. She looked only at Silas. "When this is over," she asked again, softer now, "will you still have a place for me?" Silas felt the words settle deep. He had faced stampedes, hunger, sickness, empty roads, and the long silence after burying the only woman he had ever loved. Yet this girl's question frightened him more than any of those things, because it asked him to promise a future when he had spent years living without one. He looked at her too-short dress, now mended at the sleeves with brown cloth. He looked at the Bible in her hands, the dust on her boots, the tears she no longer tried to hide. Then he looked toward the road that led back to Silver Mesa, where her father's claim was sealed and waiting. "I do not have much," Silas said. "No house of my own, no land with my name on it, no fine words that can make a hard life easy." Abigail's face lowered a little, as if she had expected that answer and had tried to prepare for it. Silas stepped closer. "But I have two hands that know how to work. I have a name that still means something to decent people. And if you will allow it, I have every intention of becoming the kind of man who can offer you more than a trail and a borrowed roof." Her eyes lifted. "I am not asking you to forget your father," he said. "I would never ask that. I am asking if you will let me stand where no one stood that day in Red Willow, not just once, every day after." Abigail held the Bible tighter. "As my guardian." "As that if the law allows." His voice grew rough. "And as family if your heart ever allows." The word family passed through the chapel yard like a bell. No one could see. Abigail covered her mouth with one hand. For a moment, she looked as if she might break apart from hearing what she had wanted too badly to ask for. Then she stepped forward and pressed her forehead against Silas's chest. He froze at first. The old grief in him did not know what to do with being needed. Then slowly, he placed one hand on her shoulder and the other over the back of her head, careful and steady, like holding something both strong and wounded. Martha turned away and wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. Belle muttered, "Dust is bad out here." "There is no dust in your eyes, Tom," Martha said. By afternoon, they returned to Silver Mesa together. Pike and Cole were both held by the deputies, and by evening half the town knew about the false debt, the stolen mule, and the spring landmen had tried to steal from an orphan girl. Truth moved fast when decent people finally stopped whispering and began speaking aloud. Daniel Harper brought Abigail into the land office just before sunset. The sealed claim lay on the desk, marked proper in the county book. Beside it was a smaller paper, one Daniel had found folded behind the original survey. "I thought you should read this," he said. Abigail took it with shaking hands. The paper was in her father's writing. "If my daughter Abigail is the one holding this, then let it be known this land is meant for her. Not because land makes a person worthy, but because she was worthy before she ever owned a single acre. She has been looked at strangely for growing tall, but I pray she learns that God did not make her too much. He made her strong enough to stand where others bend." Abigail could not finish reading aloud. Silas took off his hat. The room was quiet. Even the registrar lowered his eyes. That was the final truth her father had left her. Not just a claim, not just water, a blessing. If this story has stayed with you, remember Abigail's father's words. Some people are not too much for the world. They are simply waiting for the right place to stand. In the months that followed, justice came without gun smoke or revenge. Pike's company lost its filings when the forged papers were exposed. Cole left Silver Mesa in a prison wagon, his clean vest packed away with the rest of his lies. Luke Harper worked 2 seasons at Crosswind Ranch to make up for his first unkind words, and Abigail, being Abigail, forgave him only after he proved he had changed. Thomas Bell recovered, though he complained enough to make Martha threaten to put him back in bed. Martha helped Abigail sew 2 new dresses, both long enough in the sleeves. Silas took steady work at Crosswind, then spent every free day hauling timber to the Mercer claim. By spring, a small cabin stood near the spring line. It was not grand. The porch leaned a little to the left. The chimney smoked when the wind came from the north. But there was a table by the window, a hook for Silas's hat, a shelf for Abigail's Bible, and a place near the door where Mercy liked to stand as if she owned the whole valley. On the day the guardianship paper came through, Abigail read it once, then set it beside her father's letter. "You are quiet," Silas said. He nodded. "They thought nobody wanted me," she said. Silas stood beside her. They were wrong. Abigail smiled then, full and unguarded. Outside, the spring ran clear over stone. Mercy shifted by the fence. The cabin window glowed behind them, small but warm against the wide New Mexico dusk. Silas had once paid $2 because nobody else stepped forward. What he found was not a burden, not a mistake, and not a poor bargain. He found a daughter standing at the end of a line, and she led him home.